Hi, my name's Shahur Williams. I'm a historian, and here's what you need to know to sound smart about the 1960s. In 1964, singer Bob Dylan scored a hit with the song, "The Times They Are A-Changing." This literally could be the mantra for the decade of the 1960s, which witnessed great social, economic, and political change in America. From 1960 to the end of the decade.
All right, so make sure you jot down that Bob Dylan's song "The Times They Are A-Changin'" could be a theme song for the '60s. It was about formerly disenfranchised groups, politically powerless groups, asserting their democratic presence. All right, very good lyrics to the song.
A succession of social movements sought to stamp out inequalities in American society. The most prominent of these movements was the Civil Rights Movement, which, continuing from the 1950s, sought to ensure absolute equality before the law for African Americans in the United States. The women's movement tackled the pay disparity in work and also argued for more opportunities for women to contribute to the nation's social, economic, and political life.
We're going to get more into this in the PowerPoint, but this is the second wave of feminism that began in the '60s. The first wave was about women's suffrage. The second wave, which begins in the '60s, was more about economic equality and workplace equality.
One of the other great social movements of the 1960s was the counterculture movement. Fueled by new music, new taste, and new social norms, this counterculture changed the fabric of American society. This counterculture movement found its greatest political expression in protest against the war in Vietnam.
And again, we're going to go into much more depth during the PowerPoint, more depth in the PowerPoint, but the counterculture can also be broken up into two groups themselves, all right? You had the hippies, which is more of a social rejection of the expected conformity of the 1950s. And they were kind of apolitical. It was more about social rebellion. And you had what was called the New Left, this new breed of left-leaning, left-thinking college students, educated college students, who, again, their rebellion was more political. And I guess you could say sociological in a sense. We'll get more into that.
Where young people burned their draft cards and refused to fight in a war that they deemed immoral. The Stonewall Rebellion in New York in 1969 also signaled.
All right, so in '69 you had the Stonewall Rebellion, which is the beginning of homosexual rights, gay rights.
That lesbian, gay, and transgender Americans also wanted equal rights and the ability to exist in a society free from sexual discrimination.
Stonewall was the name of a bar in New York City.
By the close of the decade,
where a violent altercation happened between patrons of the bar and the police.
The nonviolent civil rights movement and the optimism that people had felt about the possibility of the expansion of American democracy began to take a turn. Civil rights was replaced in the minds of many in the mainstream by Black Power. Peaceful protests against the war in Vietnam by massive protests across the country, and a women's movement that in the minds of conservatives threatened the status quo and the family in America.
What he's basically getting at here is in the minds of conservatives, these movements, in their minds, had morphed into these violent things that we should be wary of. Feminists were men haters. Anti-war activists had become these violent radicals on college campuses and at the Chicago Democratic National Convention in '68. And this peaceful Martin Luther King had become this angry Black Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael and the Black Panthers and so on and so forth. This is whom Nixon is catering to in that silent majority.
All of these contributed to the rise of Richard Nixon and his success in the 1968 election.